The slap came out of nowhere. A sharp crack echoed through the hospital lobby, loud enough to silence conversations, freeze footsteps, and steal the air from the room. Kalira Vance's head snapped to the side. Her body staggered, one hand flying to her cheek, while the other clutched her swollen belly, protecting the life inside her. A broken breath escaped her lips. Not from the pain, but from the humiliation. Right there, in front of everyone. A nurse covered her mouth. A doctor stepped forward, then stopped. Another looked away completely. No one moved. No one spoke. Because standing over her was Coulter Hayes, the hospital director. "You don't question me," he said coldly, adjusting his cuff like nothing had happened. Kalira said nothing. Her chest rose and fell, her eyes glossy, but she stayed silent. Not because she was weak, but because she had learned something dangerous. In this place, speaking up came with consequences. And people like Coulter, they never lost. Around her, whispers began to form, low, nervous, careful. Because everyone knew the truth. This wasn't just a slap. It was a reminder of who had power and who didn't. But what none of them realized was that in that exact moment, everything had already changed. Be honest. If you were standing there, would you step in? Or stay silent like everyone else? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you enjoy powerful stories like this, stories that hit hard and make you think, make sure you subscribe and help us get to 1K subscribers. Because this one? It's just getting started. Kalira Vance had learned to move quietly through the hospital, not because she lacked presence, but because she had learned that presence often invited trouble. Her mornings started before the sun. By the time the first patients arrived, she was already on her feet, checking vitals, adjusting drips, offering soft reassurances to people who needed more comfort than medicine. She remembered names. She noticed pain others overlooked. She stayed longer than her shift required, not because anyone asked her to, but because she couldn't walk away when someone needed help. Most people didn't thank her. Some barely looked at her. To many, she was just another nurse in blue scrubs, moving from room to room, carrying burdens no one else wanted. But Kalira never complained. Even now, with the weight of her pregnancy slowing her steps, she kept going. One hand often rested lightly on her belly as she worked, a quiet promise to the life she carried, that no matter how hard things got, she would endure. Not everyone was kind. There were voices that spoke over her. Orders given without eye contact. Corrections made sharply, even when she wasn't wrong. She had grown used to it, the dismissive tone, the subtle disrespect, the way her silence was mistaken for weakness. She wasn't weak. She was careful. Careful with her words. Careful with her reactions. Careful not to draw attention that might turn into something worse. Because she had seen what happened to those who pushed back. So Kalira chose restraint. She chose patience. She chose to survive each day without becoming the next target. But beneath that quiet control, something had been building for a long time. And today, without her knowing it yet, that control was about to be tested. Coulter Hayes did not raise his voice to command attention. He didn't need to. The moment he stepped into a room, conversations died on their own. Shoulders straightened. Eyes lowered. Even the air seemed to tighten, as if the building itself recognized who held power within its walls. He walked with measured precision, every step deliberate, every movement controlled. His suit was always immaculate, his expression composed, his presence unmistakable. Nothing about him was careless. Not his words. Not his decisions. Not his authority. People didn't just respect Coulter Hayes. They adjusted around him. Nurses spoke quicker, choosing their words carefully. Junior doctors avoided eye contact unless necessary. Even senior staff carried themselves differently when he was near, as though one wrong move could cost more than just their pride. Because it could. Coulter believed in order. In hierarchy. In knowing exactly where you stood, and staying there. And if anyone forgot, he reminded them. Publicly. He had a way of correcting people that left no room for misunderstanding. A sharp comment. A cold stare. A quiet humiliation delivered so precisely that it stayed with you long after he walked away. No one challenged him. Not because they agreed with him, but because they understood the consequences of being on the wrong side of his attention. In his world, authority wasn't questioned. It was enforced. And Coulter Hayes enforced it without hesitation, without apology, and without ever believing he could be wrong. To him, the hospital ran because he controlled it. Every decision, every voice, every person, including those who thought they could stand their ground. Especially them. Because Coulter didn't just notice resistance. He made sure it didn't happen twice. It started with something small. It always did. The patient had been brought in late, weak, disoriented, and already showing signs that something was wrong. Kalira noticed it immediately. The subtle change in breathing. The slight delay in response. The kind of details that didn't shout for attention, but whispered to those who knew how to listen. She adjusted the chart, made a note, and recommended further observation. It should have ended there. But it didn't. Coulter Hayes stepped in just as she was finishing. His eyes skimmed the chart briefly, then shifted to her, unreadable. Discharge, he said. The word landed flat. Final. Kalira hesitated. Not long. Just enough to think. Sir. I think we should monitor a little longer, she said carefully, her voice calm, respectful. There are signs we might be missing. For a moment, nothing changed. Then something did. Coulter's gaze sharpened, not loud, not explosive, but focused in a way that made the air feel heavier. I've reviewed the case, he replied, tone even. There's nothing critical. Kalira felt it, that familiar pressure to step back, to nod, to let it go. But the patient's condition lingered in her mind. I understand, sir, she said, choosing her words slowly. But I've seen cases like this before. It could develop quickly if we're not careful. Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that stretched. Around them, movement slowed. Conversations quieted. A nurse at the far desk stopped typing. Someone else turned slightly, pretending not to listen. Because moments like this were rare. And dangerous. Coulter didn't speak immediately. He simply looked at her. Not as a colleague, but as someone who had stepped out of place. And in that brief, heavy pause, an invisible line had been crossed. Kalira felt it. Even before he said a word. And deep down, she knew. This wasn't about the patient anymore. Coulter didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You're overstepping, he said, each word measured, controlled. The room felt smaller. Kalira's fingers tightened slightly around the chart in her hands. For a second, the old instinct rose, to step back, to apologize, to let it go. That was what she had always done. What had kept her safe. But the patient shifted weakly on the bed behind her, a quiet reminder that this wasn't just about her. Not this time. I'm not overstepping, sir, she said, her voice steady, though her heart had begun to beat faster. I'm doing my job. The words hung in the air, heavier than she expected. A nurse nearby inhaled sharply. Someone else turned away completely, as if not seeing it would make it safer. Kalira felt it then, that shift. The moment something irreversible began. Coulter's expression didn't change immediately. If anything, it became more still. More precise. Your job, he repeated softly, as if testing the words. Kalira held her ground. Not aggressively. Not defiantly. But she didn't lower her gaze. I've seen this before, she continued, quieter now but no less certain. If we discharge him and something happens. You're not in a position to make that call. The interruption was clean. Final. It cut through her words without effort. Silence followed again, thicker this time. Kalira could feel every eye in the room without looking. Feel the tension pressing in, waiting to see what she would do next. She should have stopped. Everything in her experience told her to stop. But something inside her, something that had been quiet for too long, didn't. With respect, sir, she said, her voice barely above a breath, ignoring this could cost him his life. That was it. The line. Once spoken, it couldn't be taken back. And the moment the words left her mouth, Kalira knew she had just stepped somewhere she wasn't meant to stand. For a moment, nothing moved. Coulter Hayes stood completely still, his gaze fixed on Kalira as if weighing something unseen. The room held its breath, suspended in that fragile space between what had been said and what would come next. Kalira felt it. The shift. The quiet before something broke. She didn't step back. Didn't lower her eyes. She simply stood there, one hand resting protectively over her belly, the other still holding the chart, her voice now gone but her words still hanging in the air. And then, it happened. Fast. Sharp. Final. The crack echoed through the lobby, louder than anything that had been said. Kalira's head snapped to the side, the force of it catching her off guard. The chart slipped from her hand, papers scattering across the polished floor. Her body swayed slightly before she steadied herself, her palm flying to her cheek as the sting spread instantly. Her other hand tightened over her stomach. A soft, broken breath escaped her lips. Not from the pain, but from the shock of it. Of where she was. Of who was watching. No one spoke. No one moved. A nurse near the desk froze, her hand still hovering over a keyboard. A doctor took a step forward, then stopped, uncertainty locking him in place. Another turned away, unable to look. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself. Coulter adjusted his cuff slowly, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. "You will not question me," he said, his voice low, controlled. Kalira didn't respond. She couldn't. Her eyes glistened, her breathing uneven, her cheeks still burning, but she said nothing. Because in that moment, it wasn't just a slap. It was a message. And everyone in that room had received it. The silence didn't break. It settled. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Suffocating. Kalira remained where she stood, her hand still pressed against her cheek, the warmth of the impact lingering long after the sound had faded. Beneath her other hand, her belly rose and fell with each uneven breath, as if her body was trying to steady itself before her mind could catch up. Around her, life slowly resumed. But not fully. A chair scraped softly against the floor. Papers were picked up, carefully, quietly, as if making too much noise would draw attention no one wanted. The nurse at the desk lowered her eyes, typing again, though her fingers moved slower now. No one spoke to her. No one asked if she was okay. Because stepping forward meant stepping into something dangerous. And everyone knew it. Kalira swallowed, forcing air into her lungs. The sting on her cheek had dulled into a deep, throbbing heat, but it was nothing compared to the weight pressing against her chest. It wasn't just what had happened. It was how easily it had happened. How quickly the room had accepted it. Her gaze dropped briefly to the floor, to the scattered papers that had already been gathered, as if the moment itself was being erased in real time. As if it didn't matter. As if she didn't. Her fingers curled slightly against her palm. For a second, just a second, something inside her wavered. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. Something closer to breaking. But she didn't cry. Didn't speak. Didn't move. She straightened slowly, drawing what control she had left back into herself, piece by piece. Because this was what she knew. Endure. Stay quiet. Get through it. That was how she had survived this place. That was how she had made it this far. But beneath that silence, something had shifted. And even if no one else could see it, Kalira felt it. It was subtle at first. So subtle that no one could quite name it. The room looked the same. The people hadn't changed. The quiet movements, the careful glances, the unspoken agreement to move on, it was all still there. And yet, something felt different. A nurse near the entrance paused mid-step, her eyes flickering toward the glass doors before she quickly looked away. The receptionist straightened slightly, fingers hovering above the keyboard without pressing a key. Even the low hum of conversation seemed to thin, as if the air itself had grown tighter. Kalira felt it too. Not as a sound. Not as a sight. But as a shift. A strange, unexplainable stillness that settled beneath everything else, brushing against her awareness like a quiet warning. She didn't turn, didn't look. But her body recognized it before her mind did. Behind her, the doors opened. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. A faint sound, a small movement, but it carried. Footsteps followed, measured, unhurried, deliberate. Not the rushed pace of staff. Not the uneven shuffle of patients. Something else. Each step seemed to land with quiet certainty, drawing attention without asking for it. Conversations faded without anyone being told to stop. A doctor mid-sentence fell silent, his words dissolving into nothing as his focus shifted. Even Coulter Hayes, who rarely acknowledged anything outside his control, paused. It was brief. Almost imperceptible. But it was there. The kind of pause that didn't come from confusion, but from recognition. Kalira's fingers tightened slightly at her side. She still didn't turn. Didn't need to. Because whatever had just entered that room wasn't ordinary. And for the first time since the slap, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. The footsteps stopped. Not abruptly. Not uncertainly. They simply came to rest, as if the space itself had decided where they should. A man stood just inside the lobby. He didn't speak. Didn't announce himself. But his presence settled into the room with quiet authority, drawing attention without demanding it. Conversations didn't just fade, they disappeared entirely. Even the smallest movements seemed to hesitate, as if waiting for permission to continue. He was dressed simply. A black suit, perfectly tailored. Nothing excessive. Nothing out of place. Everything intentional. His gaze moved once, slow, measured, taking in the room without urgency. The scattered tension. The uneasy stillness. The people who suddenly found the floor more interesting than anything else. Then it stopped. On Kalira. For a moment, nothing changed in his expression. No visible reaction. No shift in posture. Just stillness. But something in the air tightened further. As if that single glance had anchored everything. Kalira felt it before she turned. Felt the weight of it settle across her shoulders, familiar in a way she couldn't explain in that moment. Her breath caught, just slightly, as her body stilled. Slowly, she turned. Their eyes met. And for the first time since the slap, something inside her steadied. Not because the situation had changed. Not yet. But because the silence no longer felt like something she had to endure alone. Across the room, Coulter Hayes straightened almost imperceptibly, his gaze shifting toward the man now standing at the edge of his control. There was no introduction. No explanation. Just a quiet, undeniable presence that did not belong to the rules of this place. The man said nothing. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, everyone in the room understood something had just shifted. And whatever came next would not be decided by Coulter Hayes. Coulter Hayes had spent years reading rooms. It was how he stayed in control. How he maintained order. How he knew without asking exactly where he stood in any situation. But this felt unfamiliar. He watched the man in the black suit without turning his head fully, measuring him the way he measured everything else. Appearance. Posture. Presence. There was no badge. No introduction. No reason, at first glance, for the shift that had settled over the room. And yet, it was there. Coulter felt it in the way people had gone quiet, not out of fear of him, but of something else. Something that didn't need to speak to be acknowledged. His jaw tightened slightly. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady, controlled, carrying the same authority it always had. The man didn't respond immediately. He took a step forward. Unhurried. Certain. The sound of his shoes against the floor echoed louder than it should have, each step cutting through the silence like a quiet declaration that this space no longer belonged to one man alone. Coulter held his ground. He was used to being the center of power. Used to being the one others adjusted to. But for the first time in a long time, he felt the shift happening without his permission. The man's gaze moved again, briefly, from Kalira to him. And in that single moment, something unsettled deep in Coulter's chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. Not of who the man was, but of what he represented. Power. The kind that didn't need to prove itself. Coulter's confidence didn't collapse. But it cracked. Just enough for doubt to slip in. Because suddenly, the room no longer felt like his. And the control he had always relied on didn't feel absolute anymore. No one spoke. Not when the tension finally settled. Not when the silence that once felt suffocating began to loosen its grip on the room. Kalira stood still for a moment, her breathing steady, her hand resting gently over her belly. The pain had faded, but what remained was something far more lasting. Clarity. For so long, she had believed that staying quiet was strength. That enduring without resistance was the only way to survive in a place where power spoke louder than truth. But now she understood. Silence had never protected her. It had protected everything that tried to diminish her. Her gaze lifted, calm and unwavering. There was no anger in it. No need to prove anything. Just a quiet certainty that hadn't been there before. For the first time, she didn't feel small. Not because someone had come for her, but because she had found something within herself that refused to shrink anymore. Around her, people shifted, watching her differently now. Not as someone invisible, but as someone they had underestimated. Kalira exhaled softly, grounding herself, then took a step forward. Then another. Each one steady. Intentional. Unapologetic. She wasn't walking away as a victim. She wasn't walking away as someone saved. She was walking away as someone who finally understood her own worth, and what she would never tolerate again. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Because what had changed wasn't behind her. It was within her. And as she moved forward, one truth settled quietly, powerfully. Silence is not strength when it protects injustice. And true power is not loud, it is undeniable. Thank you for staying with this story to the very end. If it spoke to you, take a moment to share your thoughts. Or tell me what you would have done differently. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us what strength really looks like.